Good morning, fifth graders. Today we are going to be reading a story, and we will be looking at the reading standard of determining the theme of the story. And by doing so, we'll be using the strategy to look at the characters and how they speak to each other, and to how they respond to the challenges in the story. And we'll summarize the text as well. And we're going to be using a fantasy fairy tale folk story today. We're going to be pulling it from the Tales of Beetle the Bard, specifically the story The Wizard and the Hopping Pot. So I will be reading it, and we'll be stopping at times to be looking at how the characters are responding to each other and the challenges around them to really determine the theme of that folk tale. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. There was once a kindly old wizard who used his magic generously and wisely for the benefit of his neighbors. Rather than reveal the true source of his power, he pretended that his potions, charms, and antidotes sprang ready-made from the little cauldron he called his lucky cooking pot. For miles around, people came to him with their troubles, and the wizard was pleased to give his pot a stir and put things right. So I'm just going to pause there really quick. The main character that we're looking at right now is the wizard, and he, at this point to me, I think he seems humble because he doesn't want to take responsibility or take claim for his magic. But there could be also something more there, because maybe he's just not talking about his magic for a different reason. So maybe we'll have to read further into the story to figure out why. This well-beloved wizard lived to a goodly age, then died, leaving all of his chattels to his only son. This son was of a very different disposition of his gentle father. Those who could not work magic were, to the son's mind, worthless, and he had often quarreled with his father's habit of dispensing magical aid to their neighbors. Upon the father's death, the son found hidden inside the old cooking pot a small package bearing his name. He opened it, hoping for gold, but found instead a soft, thick slipper, much too small to wear and with no pair. A fragment of the parchment within the slipper bore the words, "In the fond hope, my son, that you will never need it." The son cursed his father's age-softened mind, then threw the slipper back into the cauldron, resolving to use it henceforth as a rubbish pail. That very night, a peasant woman knocked on the front door. Actually, I'm going to pause there for a second. So now we have a second character, the wizard's son, who is also a wizard. So we can actually go back to the first wizard and realize he was humble, and that's why he didn't really share where he had the source of magic, but just shared his magic with others. And then his son, who is the opposite of humble, the opposite of his father. So I think the way that they interact with people and how the son interacts with people is going to be a big theme of this story. And maybe we'll see what happens with his attitude. Okay, we'll start back again. That very night, a peasant woman knocked on the front door. "My granddaughter is afflicted by a crop of warts, sir," she told him. "Your father used to mix a special poultice. Poultice? Poult It is spelled Poultice. I'm going to think, because it looks like poultry is the first part of the word, so I'm going to pronounce it as poult, and then ice. So poultice in that old cooking pot. "Begone," cried the son. "What care I for your brat's words?" And he slammed the door in the old woman's face. At once, there came a loud clanging and banging from his kitchen. The wizard lit his wand and opened the door, and there, to his amazement, he saw his father's old cooking pot. It had sprouted a single foot of brass and was hopping on the spot in the middle of the floor, making a fearful noise upon the flagstones. The wizard approached it in wonder, but fell back hurriedly that he saw that the whole of the pot's surface was covered in warts. "Disgusting object," he cried, and he tried firstly to banish the pot, then to clean it by magic, and finally to force it out of the house. None of his spells worked, however, and he was unable to prevent the pot hopping after him out of the kitchen and then following him up to bed, clanging and banging loudly on every wooden stair. The wizard could not sleep all night for the banging of the warty old pot by his bedside, and next morning the pot insisted on hopping after him to the breakfast table. Clang, 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 went the brass-footed pot, and the wizard had not even started his porridge when there came another knock on the door. Again, I will pause there. So we know that the wizard's son is not humble and rude. He seems very rude. And now it seems like the cauldron reacted to his rudeness. So that's interesting and maybe something we're going to have to come back to later. The wizard could not sleep all night for the banging of, oh, I just read that part. An old man stood on the doorstep. "'Tis my old donkey, sir," he explained. "Lost she is, or stolen, and without her I cannot take my wares to market, and my family will go hungry tonight." "And I am hungry now," roared the wizard, and he slammed the door upon the old man. Clang, 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 went the cooking pot's single brass foot upon the floor, but now its clamor was mixed with the brays of a donkey and a human groans of hunger, echoing from the depths of a pot. "Be still, be silent," shrieked the wizard, but not all of his magical powers could quite in the warty pot, which hopped at his heels all day, braying and groaning and clanging, no matter where he went or what he did. So I can see there, I think, again, the cauldron is reacting to the wizard's rudeness, which is important, I think, to note. That evening, there came a third knock upon the door, and there on the threshold stood a young woman sobbing as though her heart would break. "My baby is grievously ill," she said. "Won't you please help us? Your father bade me come if troubled." But the wizard slammed the door on her. And now the tormenting pot filled to the brim with salt water and slopped tears all over the floor as it hopped and brayed and groaned and sprouted more warts. So again, the wizard reacted poorly and was very rude, and now the cauldron is showing the consequences, I would say, or those consequences of him being rude. Though no more villagers came to seek help at the wizard's cottage for the rest of the week, the pot kept him informed of their many ills. Within a few days, it was not only braying and groaning and slopping and hopping and sprouting warts, it was also choking and retching, crying like a baby, whining like a dog, and spewing out bad cheese and sour milk, and a plague of hungry slugs. The wizard could not sleep or eat with the pot beside him, but the pot refused to leave, and he could not silence it or force it to be still. At last, the wizard could bear it no more. "Bring me all of your problems, all of your troubles, and your woes," he screamed, fleeing into the night, with the pot hopping behind him along the road into the village. "Come, let me cure you, mend you, and comfort you. I have my father's cooking pot, and I shall make you well." And with the foul pot still bounding along behind him, he ran up the street, casting spells in every direction. Inside one house, the little girl's warts vanished as she slept. The lost donkey was summoned from a distant briar patch and set down softly in its stable. The sick baby was doused with dittany and woke well and rosy. At every house of sickness and sorrow, the wizard did his best, and gradually the cooking pot beside him stopped groaning and retching and became quiet, shiny, and clean. "Well, pot?" asked the trembling wizard, as the sun began to rise. The pot burped out the single slipper he had thrown into it and permitted him to fit it onto the brass foot. Together, they set off back to the wizard's house, the pot's footsteps muffled at last. But from that day forward, the wizard helped the villagers, like his father before him, lest the pot cast off its slipper and begin to hop once more. That's the end of that story. So we're looking at the main character is the wizard's son, who is also a wizard, and how he spoke to others and spoke to the challenges around him. I'd say his biggest challenge was, I think, the pot reacting poorly to his rudeness, or maybe favorably, because that ended up teaching him the lesson of being kind to others and being helpful to others. So it was interesting to see the wizard, if he would be rude to others, then the cauldron would take on that illness that I would say peasant or non-magical person had. And so while there wasn't much conversation between the wizard and the commoners, there was maybe an unspoken conversation between the wizard and the cauldron. And so that's what we would want to focus on in this story, because then that can help us summarize the text. which I think the summary is, don't be rude, be humble, and definitely help others when you can.